All right, I am so excited to be here talking with you today. My name is Tanya Cunnington, and I am the Arts Programming Coordinator at the Orillia Museum of Art and History. And I am joined today by Darren, although we will call him D, Ahsén Douglas, a Mohawk artist. I've actually, when I started working at OMA just over a year ago now, Dee was one of the first artists that I was in contact with, and we have had this amazing rapport back and forth ever since. So almost for a year now. It was the time of COVID, so unfortunately we did have to push things back a couple times, but we have just been chatting back and forth for almost a year, and it's just been my pleasure to get to know you over this year. So specifically, we are talking today because your exhibition, We Are Still Here, is opening November the 5th of this year and running to April the 16th of 2022. So in preparation for this exhibition, I did prepare 5 questions for you. Again, we've had so many great chats in the past, but I thought, let's get these down on film. And then, people could hopefully watch this with your exhibition and get to know a little bit more about you. Does that sound good? You ready for my question?
Um,
Oh.
it's a sauna.
Asanase. Did I say it wrong?
Mm-hmm. It's
As-
okay.
How did I say it? Asanasi?
Yeah, yeah. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
You
Uh,
want to call me Tammy now?
okay, Tammy. Yeah, no, you can call me D or whatever you want, whatever you feel comfortable with. That's fine. I'll explain why later on about my name, but
Yes.
let's.
No, that's important. I want you to
Yeah,
talk about that. Yes,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, so my apologies.
No problem.
But the first thing I did want to ask you is your background basically. Tell me about yourself and what led you to become an artist?
Um, okay, I have this theory, and I've heard other artists talk about it. People are born as artists. They have this very strong, innate need to create. It doesn't have to be painting, it doesn't have to be sculpture. Sometimes it could be, the straight baking, creating. You need to make something come out of your head and make it real. And people that I've spoken to, the artists who are, the professional artists, I suppose, these people have always had this need to create. I've always been working within the arts. I've always created ever since I was a kid. I was one of those kids that stood out in art class. I always created, what the teacher thought was the best piece of art. I was always the kid that they came to if they needed a mural done or they needed a special project. So I was the kid in the corner, sketching and drawing, and doing all those sort of things. And it was sort of a part of me. It wasn't something that I felt, I would aspire to. Because, as a lot of people know, it's not an easy life being an artist. It's not financially rewarding. It's not something that you can live off of. It's a struggle. And unless you're very, very lucky and you're one of the, let's say, 5% out there, you can't really make a full-time living as a professional artist. A lot of artists I know are teachers. They run workshops. They do all kinds of side jobs in order to continue to create, in order to continue making their art. So when you have this innate need to create all the time as an artist, it's something that you can't stop doing. So, for example, I right out of high school, my art teacher got me a job as a graphic artist for the summer. And it seems from that point on, I started to continue. I went to university, York University. I started in their fine arts program. At the time, I felt it was too conceptual. They weren't giving me what I wanted, which at the time was I wanted more technical knowledge. I wanted to learn how to paint. I wanted to learn how to sculpt. I wanted the how-tos, not the conceptual part of it. I took a lot of art history courses. I took what was it called? A restoration course. They were all very interesting. They were very good. But it wasn't giving me what I wanted. So I moved on to Humber College and I started working with design and photography. So I moved from more of a traditional art career or art training to more of I suppose a modern method, you could call it. So I became a professional photographer in a studio for a number of years. I was still working on different traditional art projects. At that point, I started to create stone cut lithographs. I had a limited series out, and this is like mid to late 80s. So, you know, I've always been working with art. Eventually I needed to start making a living. You know, you're getting that to that age and you say, okay, I need to make some money. So I sort of segued into another field, but it also allowed me to create cover art on the side.
Know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So eventually I actually started working as this sort of segued into more of a permanent graphic art sort of career, commercial artist career. So I started working with publishing companies creating book covers. And there's still, I've been doing this for about 20 years. So there's a lot of book covers that I've created out there still. At the time I thought they were good, but I look back on, you know, you look back 20 years ago and a lot of it's kind of embarrassing. Some of them I will actually see and I'll go, oh, well, yeah, actually, that's not too bad. So I don't feel too badly about it. But a lot of the earlier work that I've done, it was more, you know, it's a little embarrassing to see your earlier work. But I've always been involved in art. I always created art. And eventually I came to a point in my life where I was able to switch over to more of a fine arts sort of career, which is what I'm doing now. And, you know, the difference is I am working for myself. The ideas are coming from me. Whereas as a commercial artist, you're working with other people's ideas.
Do you have anybody in your family that was, you know, an artist in a sense that, you know, they had to get it out of them as well? I'm always
No.
curious as to why people become an artist. No?
Yeah, no, I don't really, I sort of, it's just sort of happened. It's one of those
Yeah.
weird things. I'll tell you a funny story though. When I was 3, we moved away from Ganawage. Originally from, my family's from Ganawage. I was 3 and we moved to a small town, and they had this sort of makeshift library. And I was a kid. I liked reading. I liked looking at books. So my father would take me to the library, get a book out. And I kind of vaguely remember this happening, but my father told me afterwards that I had to return the book. It was the due date. And this is when they took those cards and they stamped the date on it when you were supposed to bring it back.
Yep, I remember that.
Yeah, I wanted to keep the book. So what I did is I took out my my pencil and I changed the date. And then we brought it back. And you know, at that date, I don't know how long I extended it for. But my father said he received a phone call from the librarian. She said, well, I think that your son may have changed the due date on the stamp. And he's apologizing. He says, but, you know, he did a really good job. We couldn't tell that it was changed. We had to check our records. So my father felt that at that point in time, I could go down 2 paths. I could either be a counterfeiter or I could be an artist. And I think he would probably be pleased to learn that I became an artist.
Artist, exactly.
Yeah. Although I would have been able to make a lot more money as a counterfeiter.
Yeah. Yes, you may have. Yes. Well, that's a great story. But also what I take away from that is I love the fact that you really wanted to read this book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, let's discuss your name, which I apologize that I said it correctly at the beginning. But you have talked about, because again, we've talked about this in the past, that your name is very important to you, that you prefer not to be called Darren, if possible, that you prefer your Mohawk name, Ahsén.
Very
Right?
good. Yeah. That's yeah.
Can you explain the meaning and the importance of this name to you?
Yeah. It's important on many levels, really. Ahsén was given to me by my grandmother when I was born. And the way that names are given within the Mohawk tradition is they are passed down from generation to generation. So when a person passes away, their name is then given to another child within that family. So my name actually belonged to my great-great-grandfather. And so I carry that name with a lot of pride. When I was originally born, my Mohawk name was on my papers, as well as I have two other middle names which I don't use. They were on my papers, but I don't know what happened. Eventually, through the years, my Mohawk name dropped off my official paperwork. I think people felt that it wasn't important enough to keep because they couldn't pronounce it.
Right. Yeah.
So it's something that I want to hang on to because I'm very proud of it. I don't consider my colonial name, and I've heard another person call it this, I don't consider my colonial name truly representative of who I am. And as an artist, because we create from our heart, we create from our soul, I feel that Ahsén Nase is actually closer representation of who I am rather than my colonial name. But my colonial first name, it doesn't fit me, or I don't fit it. It's just, it doesn't work for me. So because of the way that I create art, I prefer to go by my Mohawk name, and I sign all my paintings with my Mohawk name. Yeah. And another reason is if I ever become really famous, I want to have a single monitor like Madonna and Sting and, be Watson.
Yes, exactly. And Vincent Van Gogh signed his Vincent. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So you would not have met then, if your name was passed on after your great grandpa passed away, you would not have met him, obviously, right?
No. He passed away about 10-15 years before I was born. So I have a lot of pictures of him, and I now know where I get my ears and my nose.
Right.
But
that's beautiful, though. That's a beautiful story.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
No, I think I love. I often think about how I came to be in life, and so I think to be able to be named after somebody that important in your family, that just and then back and back and back. I just find that very fascinating. Yeah. I wonder if maybe he was a creative person. We'll never know, right?
No, I don't know. Yeah, there's all kinds of stories about him. He owned a haunted farm, and my great aunts would tell me about growing up in the house and all the things that would happen, and it became a family ghost story. So I mean, he's such a strong character within our family that I carry his name with pride.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Okay, let's talk about your exhibition then.
Okay.
Yeah, third question. We are still here. As I mentioned, it runs from November the 5th, opening reception November the 6th. I think we just determined that, till April the 16th, 2022. It is an exhibition of portraits, but again, we've spoken so many times over this last year. You mentioned that they are so much more than just portraits. Basically, you kind of have a philosophy behind portraiture. Would you like to explain that in some more detail for me?
I shall try.
Yeah.
I describe myself first as a figurative painter, and I use people, or I use their physical appearance to help me express an idea or a concept that I have, so that when they're either sitting for me or when we're working towards this concept, I'm not 100% concerned with a likeness. I'm trying to create a relationship with them within the painting, with the background, with any other secondary objects or people, and I'm trying to create this this feeling, and which conceptually will express what I'm trying to to create. So the portraiture is very secondary. It doesn't have to look like the person as long as I'm getting this feeling across. For me, the difference between what I do and portraiture is, when you're creating a portrait of somebody, typically it's a commission, and you have a very strong intention to create a likeness. That is your number one motivation is to create this likeness. Otherwise, it's not going to be a portrait. Since I don't have that strong motivation when I'm painting my different paintings, I don't consider it a portrait. I consider it, more of a figurative painting.
And these are obviously, the sitter is sitting for you for your purposes, right?
Yeah.
So you feel like you don't really owe it to them, which is kind of liberating, I bet. Yeah.
In some cases, I'll beg and I'll ask people. I'll give them favors if they'll sit for me. On occasion, I'll pay them to sit for me. But if I have this concept or this idea, I will place the model in the position or in the lighting that I require for that concept, and then I will work with them, around them, to get things done.
Do you know the models of, so for this exhibition, do you know every single model that is going to be on the show? Yeah. On a personal level?
To varying degrees. Some of them are family. So, my kids have been posing for me a lot. Some of them are friends. Some of them are actually people that I met on the internet through Twitter. There's native Twitter that I'm involved in. And I would see them and I would ask if they could send me a picture, or if they've already had pictures posted, I would ask them, can I use this picture for a painting I have in mind? And typically they're very positive and they're very much interested in helping me out. I prefer to work from live models, and I've been working from live models for close to, well, since the 80s, since I started, going to university. So I have this ability. I know how the body is shaped and how the forms turn, and I know how light will strike it and what happens. So I because of COVID and because of the expense of models and the difficulty of finding models, I've been able to work more and more from photographs, because if I see a shadow, let's say on the neck, I'll know that's happening because of the way that the muscles and the bone are working. So when I'm creating this illusion of three-dimensionality on a two-dimensional surface, I'm trying to duplicate that feeling. Because, let's admit it, paintings are lies, which are trying to create this three-dimensional illusion on a two-dimensional surface. So I feel comfortable now working with photographs, although I do prefer to work with a model.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I noticed too, you're such a skilled painter, first off, because I have seen a couple of your videos where you do show your process a little bit. So I hope that people get to see those. But you do a little bit of an underpainting, and then you basically build and build and build.
Yeah.
And so you definitely have this amazing concept of light and dark and shadow. You're, like I said, you're very skilled in that. How long? Like, I'm thinking, if you are, painting a portrait from a photograph, it's probably a little bit different than if you're painting it in real life. But how long, very, very generally, would it take you to complete a portrait?
It would depend. If I have an exhibit and I have to get a certain number of paintings completed,
Like this one?
like this one, yeah. I've been known to work 7 days a week, 10 to 15 hours a day.
Wow.
And when I was at my top form, I think I finished a large 30 by 40 painting in about 2 weeks.
Wow.
But that was working, 7 days a week, at least 10 hours a day.
Wow.
Now, if I'm not too rushed, I can probably get a paint. Well, I work on a number of paintings at a time. I don't always work on just one. So it's hard to pin down exactly how long it would take, but I could probably get 2 or 3 paintings done in a month, because I'm working at the same time, because you have to wait for the paint to dry and then you go back in. I don't always start my paintings the same way. It depends on how I'm feeling. Sometimes I'll create a grisaille. Sometimes I'll do an underpainting. I didn't fully sketch it out, but I would have a very detailed underdrawing, and then I would work on top of that. And I found that the paintings tended to look too cartoon-like. It was too graphic. I had this urge to, color in the lines. and it sort of stunted my expression. So what I'm doing, I don't know if you've seen any videos, but what I do now is I start straight from, the model or the photograph to the canvas, and I'm just throwing paint on, and I'm mapping out the envelope and the spaces and the features, and I'm just working from there. As an artist, personally, I find that more rewarding. It's more difficult, but I also find it more rewarding.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've I've tried my hand at portraiture. It is not easy. So
Mhm.
I applaud you.
No problem.
So let's Okay, so I would like to talk about some of the pieces that are in your exhibition now. I have two that I'd like to specifically talk to you about. So first off, can we talk a little bit about the painting called My Great Great Grandmother Was Princess Leia? In our talks, we've talked a little bit about the importance too of ancestry and community. So if we could, maybe talk about that through this painting, I think that would be a great opportunity here.
Okay. First of all, the title, a lot of people find it funny. Some people understand what I'm trying to say. I think mostly Indigenous people will get it. Sometimes non-Indigenous people will get it. But if you're in the United States, it's very common for people in the US, non-Indigenous people, to want to claim Native ancestry for whatever reason. And they will typically say, well, my great great grandmother was an Indian princess. Um, and it seems to be very, very common for some reason. It's always an Indian princess. And Native people, Indigenous people, we find this very funny because, of course, there was no royalty. There were no princesses, there were no kings. It did not exist. Um, so this seems to be a very common trait in the United States. And it's actually sort of transferring to Canada as well. And I probably shouldn't say this. I wanted to specify that there is a difference between Indigenous ancestry and being able to call yourself Indigenous or being able to call yourself Mohawk or Ojibwe. And it's has more to do with community and how you're connected to this community, your family ties, and your culture than your blood quantum or the amount of ancestry that you have.
Right.
Because when you're an Indigenous person, it's so much more than just your blood. It's your connections, it's your community, it's your family, it's how you grew up.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so, the painting was sort of making fun of these people that claim to be Indigenous.
Mhm.
So I said, well, I mean, if a non-Indigenous white person in the United States can say they have a great 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 grandmother who's Indigenous, who's an Indian princess rather, why can't an Indigenous woman claim to have a great 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 grandmother who was Princess Leia?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the person who posed for this portrait,
Mhm.
she is an Indigenous lawyer in the United States. I think she was in North Dakota, and I met her through Twitter,
Oh,
and we
amazing.
were talking back and forth. And I asked her if she would mind, posing for me, and she sent me a bunch of photographs. And she had this one particular photograph of her dressed up as Princess Leia, and immediately I knew what I wanted to do with it.
Perfect,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Well, because it's accessible too, because I think it's a subject that's very important, but again, by using humor, you've
Mhm.
drawn people into question the title. I really enjoy what you talk about with community, and I think you did create the video. What's the name of that video again that you released? You interviewed people about community and
Yeah.
ancestry.
Yeah.
Um, and I think somebody that was in there was talking about having an auntie or a cousin,
Hmm.
and how that to her signifies that you are part of a community.
Yeah.
um, and I have been living in the Rama First Nation for a couple years now, and my partner's Indigenous, and I have not. I grew up without a sense of community, and I'm really learning what a strong community it is. To be a part of, um, that. Basically, it's
Mhm.
they're very close knit, a lot of family,
Yeah.
and you do run into that quite a bit where, oh, I'm your cousin,
Yeah.
or you're my aunt is, and I love that sense of community, and something that I've never had before. So it really, again, it struck a chord with me when you started talking about that,
Yeah.
and then hearing the person in your video talk about, family
Mhm.
basically, and family ties and how strong that can be. Yeah.
But I find that this sense of community also extends to other Mohawk communities. For example, Six Nations. I've started exhibiting quite often at the Woodland Cultural Center in Brantford, and I've met people, and I've had invitations from perfect strangers that I've never met for me to come and stay at their place during the next powwow if I had no place to go.
That's
And
amazing.
it's because we have this connection. And you know, I was doing a presentation, and there was an older lady sitting next to me. We were working together, and while everybody was working and doing their assignments, we were just chatting back and forth, and we just connected, and we started talking, and we started making jokes that only two Mohawk people would know, and we were a little bit of the language was going back and forth. I'm not a fluent speaker, but when I do have a chance to practice, I really love it. It feels so good to me. But we formed this connection, and she was a perfect stranger a few hours before that, and before I knew it, we were like relatives. I don't know if you can get that anywhere else.
Right. All right, the final piece I would like to speak about is the invite piece for your exhibition, We Are Still Here.
Hmm.
Um, it was, again, because this exhibition has been pushed back a bit due to COVID, it was originally called Lost Legacy,
Hmm.
painting right behind you there.
Yep.
And it's now called Unmarked.
Hmm.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about that, and also your thoughts on Indigenous children, how they're often labeled as resilient.
Hmm.
It struck a chord with me having an Ojibwe son. um, you know, I was reading this a bit, and it just really spoke to me. So if you can expand on that just a little bit, I'd love to hear that.
Sure. A lot of, we'll start with the naming. I don't always have a title for a painting. I find that the hardest part of creating a painting is figuring out what the title will be. Sometimes a title will come to me as I'm painting it, and sometimes I won't have a title that I think fits it perfectly. So I give it sort of a moniker, or I give it sort of, just something in my mind so that I can separate it from the other paintings. And Lost Legacy was what that painting started out with. Um, Once the unmarked graves started to be discovered earlier this year, it just unmarked just became what that painting was about. It all of a sudden a light bulb came on, and I knew, okay, that's what the painting is.
Yeah.
That's what it needs to be called. That's what it represents. Because I didn't have the words for it, but I
Mm.
knew what the feelings were that I wanted: the sadness and the just the entire circumstance of what's going on right now. So that's why the title did change, and that's why it's going to stay as unmarked. Um, you know, as far as Indigenous children are concerned, I was thinking about this, and I found it very strange that Indigenous children are always described as resilient. There are saying, oh, those Indigenous children, they live in such poverty, but they are so resilient. They are so able to overcome these difficulties. And then I looked at I thought about other non-Indigenous children that, I also teach in elementary schools as a freelance teacher. Um, and I often don't hear these children being described as resilient. That's just not a word that is used to describe them. They'll be described as beautiful, pretty, athletic, smart, handsome, all of these other terms, bright, but you never hear non-Indigenous children being called resilient.
Right. Yeah.
But it seems that Indigenous children, most 80% of the time, are called resilient. And that's become a character trait that people idolize, or they look up to. But really, the resiliency isn't something that we should be proud of. because the reason that our children are resilient is because they've had to learn to be resilient.
Right.
Because of the way they've grown up, the way that colonialism has worked against them. This resiliency has been bred into them. I hate to say this, but those children that aren't resilient don't survive to become adults. So resiliency has become a learned trait of survival.
Yeah.
So by constantly telling us that our children are resilient, I feel that that society is idolizing this survival trait. And I don't think that is something that we should actually compliment. We should tell people that Indigenous children are smart and they're intelligent and they're brave and they're beautiful. Yeah. These should be the words that we should be using.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfectly well said. Yeah, exactly. I think we are done the 5 questions, but is there anything else at all that you would like to say about this body of work or this exhibition before we wrap up here?
Sure. We Are Still Here it's a group of paintings. Some are portraits, although that wasn't the key motivation. They're characterizations. What I've been trying to do is show people that Indigenous people aren't all wearing feathers and leather and beadwork. You could be working with an Indigenous person and you don't know it. We are still here. We are still part of society. We are among you. When I originally started teaching, 2014, a little girl, I did some oral stories. I did some talking to I think it was grade 4. And, we had a really good time. And I was the first Indigenous person that these kids ever met. And I remember leaving the classroom about 3 o'clock. It was a portable. And the bell rang and this little girl ran out to her father and he bent down because she wanted to say something. And she whispered in his ear, but I could still hear it. She said, "He's an Indian." And I felt that was so strange because she didn't realize that we still existed, that we were still here. And although it's changed, in that period of time, a lot of the books and a lot of the material that non-Indigenous kids use in school are historical books, history books. Yeah. That talks about us 500 years ago, contact, pre-contact, where we have feathers and we have leather and we have, different types of traditional older clothing. And the kids grew up thinking that this is the way that we were. In a lot of cases, they didn't even know that we existed anymore. They thought that we were extinct. And in the United States, you will come across people that say Indigenous people don't exist, they're extinct. And I felt that was really strange. And I wanted to create paintings of contemporary Indigenous people, contemporary issues, contemporary characterizations of people that I know. So it became a way of me telling people that, yes, we are still here. We still exist.
I think that's actually, again, beautifully said, because in my experience in school, being a child in the 80s and 90s, First Nation studies were taught like as chunks, right? So it's like you learn about, this, that, the other, you learn about the dinosaurs, you learn about, Indigenous peoples. And you're right, it was just this little segment that you learned and it was all historically based. You're completely right. It wasn't in any way explained to me that it changed over time. Yeah, no, perfectly said. Yeah. So Dee, Asanase, I have had an excellent time talking with you today. As I said, we've spoken so much over the last year, and it is always a pleasure to chat with you. I'm really looking forward to this exhibition. It is called We Are Still Here. It's going to be at the Orillia Museum of Art and History. It starts November the 5th and runs until April the 16th, 2022. But the opening reception will be on Saturday from 1 to 3, I believe, Saturday, November the 6th from 1 to 3 p.m. So you are all welcome to join us for that. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I enjoy this very much, and I look forward to working with the Orillia Museum of Art and History as well as yourself. We can finally meet in person. We haven't met in person.
I should say that we've been Zooming for a year.
Yeah. It's been fun.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, well.
I just read Marlon Brando's autobiography, and he was talking about, because he often fought for First Nations causes, and he was saying what a great sense of humor that the people that he was helping to fight, they had in, that was what they all had in common, their great sense of humor. They could be, blockaded up and in the middle of a battle, but they would still find light and humor in it.
Mhm.
So anyway, it always stuck with me, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if it's something that developed during colonialism and it's sort of a coping mechanism, or if it's something that's been truly innate and has always been there. But
Yeah.
all kinds of Native people that I meet, they have this weird sense of humor that I get.
Yeah.
But, a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's true. Yeah.
so it's good to know that it's not just me.
No, not at all.
On a circuit of an Indian dream, we don't get old, we just get younger. When we're flying down the highway, riding in our Indian cars. We're on a circuit of an Indian dream. We don't get old, we just get younger. When we're flying down the highway, riding in our Indian cars. Riding in our Indian cars.
So Ahsén.
Ahsén.
Hey!